Adaptation, especially book-to-film adaptation, is nearly as old as the practice of filmmaking. When the motion picture camera was invented and the earliest versions of motion pictures recorded, it took a couple of years for filmmakers to think about adapting a book into a film. For example, Round Table Garden Scene is considered to be the first motion picture ever recorded. Louis Aime Augustin Le Prince recorded this 2-minute scene in 1888 with the camera he invented. This is the single lens camera Le Prince invented in the same year, 1888. Exactly 8 years after Le Prince's Round Table Garden Scene, in 1896, George du Maurier's well-known novel called Trilby was adapted into film. The scene of Trilby sitting at a table, eating cake and talking to her friend Little Billy is adapted into a 45-second long moving picture. Even though the footage is lost and the filmmaker is unknown, a short film version of Trilby is made, somewhere in the history of cinema. As a result of thousands of attempts of adaptation, it became a major topic in film studies, and many theorists tried to contribute to the ongoing discussion of adaptation. My attempt to contribute to this discussion will be about the so-called unfilmable novel, Laurence Sterne's The Life and Opinions of Tristram Shandy, and Michael Winterbottom's 2005 film adaptation, A Cock and Bull Story. To see how Winterbottom managed to adapt the unfilmable novel, or did he really? To appreciate a Cock and Bull Story's quality as an adaptation, I will divide adaptation into two different approaches, traditional and modern. One of the most important terms for traditional adaptation is probably fidelity. The adapted text faithfulness to the prior text is crucial for the traditional approach. Thomas Leach, in his book called Film Adaptation and Its Discontents, says that despite innumerable exceptions to the rule, adaptation theorists have persisted in treating fidelity to the source material as a norm, from which unfaithful adaptations depart at their peril. Therefore, as Leach argues, fidelity is a norm, and adaptations that are not exactly faithful to their source text take the risk of getting negative criticism from adaptation theorists and film critics. This issue with fidelity has caused many layered questions and concerns. For instance, if an adapted text fidelity to its prior text is a necessity, doesn't it highlight one text, in many cases one medium, or even an art form, always more than the adapted text? About this issue, Seeger in his article says that as an honorific status bestowed on the earlier work, it is the condition of being the original, which privileges one text in relation to its adaptations. Being fully faithful to the prior text results in some issues about originality, because the adapter's creative control is bounded to the prior text. Linda Hutchin, in her book called A Theory of Adaptation, says, as we have also seen, however, adaptation recalls as well, and usually to its disadvantage, the idea of hierarchy in the arts. Adapted films trying to be faithful to their source texts may create a hierarchy among mediums, because the adapter's fidelity can be a restriction of originality. When the original is actually the privileged, the medium of the adapted text became disadvantaged. This is the main reason why Tristram Shandy is considered unfilmable. Sterne's novel's formal structure is extraordinary, fragmented and chaotic. He avoids having a clear narrative flow and continuously intervenes the flow with opinions. These not always related opinions hinder Sterne to continue his narrative so much that Tristram Shandy, the character whose life is the topic of the novel, cannot even be born until the third volume. Moreover, many opinions of Tristram, according to Sterne, are comments on his act of writing and his digressive style. He says, I begin with writing the first sentence, and trusting the Almighty God for the second. The unplanned flow of narrative with meta-commentary makes Tristram Shandy seem inadaptable. Seeger similarly says that Laurence Sterne's Tristram Shandy appears to resist adaptation. Its verbal density, narrative complexity, and self-conscious bookishness mark it out as intensely medium-specific. Sterne uses the novel's bookishness as a tool to convey ideas. While writing Tristram Shandy, Sterne was influenced by John Locke's An Essay Concerning Human Understanding, which is about the foundation of human knowledge. Especially Book 2 is about how humans build simple and complex ideas. Sterne, similarly, uses Tristram Shandy as a blank slate and conveys his opinions through literature. The narrative in literature may be suitable to convey opinions, but how can someone film opinions? How the filmic language and narrative can allow someone to convey opinions? The infamous Black Page can be an example. This Black Page is about the person Yorick, the religious figure in Tristram Shandy. Yet, he is more than being a fictional character because Sterne cares for Yorick and regards him as a role model. Yorick, or probably a figure in Sterne's real life, is so important for him that he is the narrator of Sterne's next novel, A Sentimental Journey, which tells Yorick's experience of traveling in the 18th century France and Italy. So, Sterne values the parts that he talks about him. This is why, when Yorick dies, Sterne leaves a black page as Yorick's epitaph and elegy in Volume 1, Chapter 11. Sterne devotes one of his physical pages to Yorick, and by leaving it black, he inputs his opinion about Yorick. He uses the medium specificity of his novel by using the physicality of literature for his benefit. This is why Tristram Shandy is unfilmable, because putting a black page in the novel is not the same as leaving a couple of seconds of the film black.
When a good person Yorick dies, the book has a completely black page.
I don't know how interesting a black screen is going to be for an audience.
A black frame in a film generally recalls emptiness in the audience, whereas having a black page is always an addition by the author, because the film's mediality is different from literature. A film adaptation of the novel seems to be unable to carry the epitaph for Yorick, so a film adaptation of Tristram Shandy needs to leave some part of the novel out of the adaptation. Yet, Milan Kundera in his article named An Introduction to Variation indicates another issue. In all literature, there are two novels that are absolutely irreducible, totally unrewritable: Tristram Shandy and Jacques le Fataliste. How can one simplify such a brilliant disorder and be left with anything? What would be left? According to Kundera, a rewrite of Tristram Shandy is impossible because of its irreducible nature. The novel is bounded to its own mediality so much that an attempt of simplification, reduction, rewriting, and adaptation will result in leaving with nothing. This is the main reason why Tristram Shandy is considered unfilmable. Of course, according to the traditional sense of adaptation. In modernity, ideas of adaptation changed in an adapter-friendly way. Modernist approach to the adaptation is different from the traditional aspect in many ways. While leaving some parts of the source text unadapted is criticized by traditional adaptation theorists, modernity offers a more independent model for adapters. Linda Hutchin starts off by giving the Oxford Dictionary definition of the verb adapt before talking about adaptation, and I will follow her way too. The verb adapt means to make a person or thing suitable or fit for a purpose, or conformable to specified conditions, standards, or requirements, to make suitable for a new purpose or to a different context or environment. Therefore, the act of adapting is actually an act of adjustment and making the text suitable for the other environment. Then, the importance of being faithful is replaced with adjustment and suitability. The adapter's position is transformed from being a translator to an adjuster, and the adapter's adjustment in adapting a novel to a film does not have to be an attempt to solely translate a book to a film. A novel, in order to be dramatized, has to be distilled, reduced in size, and thus inevitably complexity. The modern theorists of adaptation are not only at peace with the creative changes done by the adapter, but they also think this is necessary. Adjustments in adapting a novel to a film require a reduction in size and complexity in order to remediate the novel, and this reduction does not mean any loss for the adapted text, because modern scholars stress the gain rather than losses of adaptation. Tristram Shandy can be unfilmable in a traditional sense. but modern theorists open up new possibilities for adaptation. While Winterbottom's A Cock and Bull story actually transcodes some of the elements that Sterne had in his novel, the life and opinions of Tristram Shandy, Gentleman, has some elements that can survive in the film, with different approaches and forms. As Wojciech points out in his article, transmediality is the phenomena which appear independently of their media setup. Tristram Shandy remains comic and satiric, independently of the medium in which it appears. Now, I will talk about some of the elements of Tristram Shandy that Winterbottom managed to transcode into a Cock and Bull story. Sterne wants his readers' active creative input. The reader is not a sole observer but an active participant in Tristram's journey. He says the truest respect which you can pay to the reader's understanding is to hold this matter amicably and leave him something to imagine, in his turn and as well as yourself. Above Sterne's continuous invite of collaboration, Seeger says that Tristram takes the idea of collaboration beyond our merely imagining action or speech he has left out. He requests the reader to write, draw, vocalize, or perform parts of the novel. And by doing so, Sterne's elliptical and aposiopistic devices actively invite adaptation, be it further writing, vocal or physical performance, or illustration. Therefore, Tristram Shandy is not complete without the creative input from the reader. Winterbottom, being a reader in the first step of adaptation, includes his creativity while adapting the novel, as Sterne suggested. Winterbottom's attempt was to turn out something with the same attitude that Sterne has in his book. So, in which aspects did Winterbottom catch the attitude of Sterne and mirror it in his film? Tristram Shandy is a meta-novel. Sterne continuously comments on his act of writing, his style, and how digressive he is. In a way, Tristram Shandy is about Sterne's attempt to write a novel. What a rate have I gone on at, curveting and frisking it away, 2 up and 2 down for 4 volumes together, without looking once behind or even on one side of me to see whom I trod upon. In volume 4, chapter 20, Sterne stops his narrative flow to talk about his writing process and shares his fascination with how fast he wrote 4 volumes. There are many more examples of meta-writing throughout Sterne's novel. Winterbottom's A Cock and Bull story reflects this meta-status in the film. It reveals the process of adapting Tristram Shandy. Winterbottom says in production notes, "So much of the book was about the process of writing the book. The only way to mirror that was to do a film about making a film." By filming something meta, Winterbottom mirrors Sterne's meta act of writing. Moreover, they both talks about the hardships of creating a work in their medium. Sterne says, as a comment on his writing, "I am just thrown so many volumes back." Sterne's meta-proportion shows the slowness of writing. He complains about life being faster than his pen. In the film, Winterbottom and the production crew talks about many hardships from finance to what to choose from the book to adapt. Moreover, the film's meta-status opens up new possibilities for the director. The film's main humor comes from the actors playing themselves. Tristram Shandy's meta-quality is comedic and satiric and makes the plot suitable for a celebrity mockumentary. Apart from comedy, this meta-status of the film increases the chaotic impact of Tristram Shandy on A Cock and Bull story. Chaos is a huge part of Tristram Shandy's narrative style. Sterne continuously digresses the narrative with opinions and remarks, and creates a chaotic way of narration. The placement of the preface is an example of this chaotic structure. "All my heroes off my hands. This is the first time I have had a moment to spare, and I will make use of it and write my preface." The preface, which should traditionally be at the beginning, is placed at volume 3. Page 172. Sterne's novel is structureless and accordingly chaotic, because his pen governs him, he governs not it. This planless writing lets Sterne be independent of any narrative structure, yet this anti-structural form results in chaos. Sterne also seems to acknowledge the chaos in his writing. By this contrivance, the machinery of my work is of a species by itself. 2 contrary emotions are introduced to it, and reconciled, which were thought to be at variance with each other. In a word, my work is regressive and it's progressive too, and at the same time. The discrepancy of progression and regression in Sterne's style is the sole reason why Tristram Shandy is chaotic, because progression and regression are two opposite forces, and Sterne attempts to keep both of them at the same time in his writing. Winterbottom's transcoding of Sternian chaos is similar but remediated. Instead of having narrative chaos, a cock and bull story has a chaotic blur between documented reality and cinematic reality, or as Bennett argues, it refuses ultimately to resolve uncertainties about the relationship between reality and cinematic simulacrum. The first reason for this blur is casting. There are actors playing themselves, such as Steve Coogan and Rob Brydon, yet some of the characters are played by actors, even though they seem to take part in the same reality as Coogan and Brydon. Jenny and Jenny are fictional characters played by Kelly MacDonald and Naomi Harris, and they had nothing to do with Coogan's personal life. Even though the main actors, Coogan and Brydon, are playing themselves, there is no Michael Winterbottom playing themselves, or even the character of Winterbottom. The director's name is Mark and played by Jeremy Nordham. However, the New York Times reporter Stephen Roderick and TV interviewer Tony Wilson are playing themselves in the film. Therefore, there is a constant blur of who is real and who is fictional. Moreover, there is also a blur in fake cameras and real cameras, or fake film crews and real film crews. According to production notes, Dylan Moran, who plays Dr. Slop in the film, says that there were a couple of days that I had to remember which cameras were fake and which were real. Everybody was mirroring the reality. You had actors being actors, and actors being crew, and crew being actors. The whole thing became a hall of mirrors. This is the remediation of Winterbottom. The structureless and chaotic writing of Sterne is transcoded as chaos, but in a different medium. Towards the end, this blur between reality and cinematic reality becomes even more blurry as we cut to the crew screening. There, the reality is so distorted that it is impossible to know whether the whole film we watched is actually the crew screening. Coogan and Jenny's estranged kiss and Coogan's baby being out of sight also stirs this confusion. Maybe this is the only scene where the actors actually play themselves. In many cases, the reality is blurred, and this blur is a representation of Sterne's chaotic style. In Tristram Shandy, there is a clear obsession with the human body and its features. Each character has its own obsession. Tristram is obsessed with noses, Trim with knees, and Mrs. Shandy with ears. First, I want to declare that the word nose throughout all this long chapter of noses and in every other part of my work, I mean a nose, and nothing more or less, just like Sterne does in Tristram Shandy. Marcus Walsh says in his chapter called Sterne and the Body, even though they are not visually realized for us through their physical appearance, we are constantly reminded that they exist in the body, that it determines their responses and limits or enables their actions. They think about it, they have theories about it, they are embarrassed or elated by it, they express themselves through it, by their gestures and facial expressions. They live in a constant relation with it, at peace or at war. This obsession with the human body serves a purpose in the novel. Sterne uses this obsession to convey their ideas about strength and social status. Tristram says, for 3 generations at least this tenet in favor of long noses had gradually been taking root in our family. Having a long nose means masculinity in the Shandy family. Slavkenbergi's tale in Volume 4 also shows the Sternian obsession of bodily features. Winterbottom mirrors this obsession in Kakombul's story. The nose that makeup artist attached to Coogan is an indication of status as well. The nose is attached every time Coogan plays Tristram Shandy, the narrator of Sterne's modern classic. Yet, they detach the nose every time he plays himself, Steve Coogan, an actor in the British film industry. When he plays Coogan, the audience get to see his attempt to have a bigger and more influential role. and every time he plays Coogan, he lacks a long nose. Coogan's attempt to have a higher status than Rob Brydon in the set is enriched by stern use of bodily obsessions. Similarly, the big fake womb shows Coogan's decreasing status in set. Coogan's attempt to be bigger than Rob Brydon results in him being naked, small, and upside down in a fake womb. By transcoding Stern's use of the human body into the film, Winterbottom also manages to straighten his comedy. The actor's obsession with their physicality is funny and sometimes silly. Just like Coogan's womb, Brydon's comment on his teeth color shows his insecurities as an actor. Yet, it is also a source of comedy for the audience, because the mind is vanquished by the body, and from victory arises laughter. Therefore, this obsession with physicality is transmedial. It survives and even thrives in Winterbottom's movie. The attempt to have a consensus of Tristram Shandy's unfilmability invites discussion, and many ideas, and sometimes opposite ideas, emerge from these discussions. A Cock and Bull story's quality as an adapted text differs immensely from one theorist to another. While Virkov argues that there are no unfilmable texts, Eliot remarks that a Cock and Bull story is regarded by some as proof of Tristram Shandy's unfilmability. Also, Melvin New, a professor who dedicated his life to Laurence Sterne, says a good movie of Tristram Shandy can be made, and Michael Winterbottom deserves enormous credit for revealing that to us, even if sketchily and momentarily. Yet, Eliot's idea can be the only argument that can unite all of these theorists. She says, as long as there is no reciprocal discourse of unreadable books, unfilmable films, and unwritable films, the discourse of unfilmable books, filmed or unfilmed, will remain locked in dogma and myth. What is filmability, writability, or adaptability? How do we define these terms? What makes a text filmable or unfilmable? What are the requirements of being filmable? Yes, as Eliot says, we lack these definitions, and all the theorists I talked about attempt to figure out a way to define Tristram Shandy's filmability or unfilmability. My intention here is similar. If Oxford Dictionary defines the word adapt as an adjustment to make something sustain in a new environment, the adapter should be the one who makes these changes. The title of the adapter does not only mean a person who translates the book into a film, but the person who changes the prior text to make it sustain in the new medium, or shortly, the adapter is actually an adjuster. While some of them values the adjustments of Winterbottom that transcode Sterne's seemingly medium-specific approaches into the film, there are theorists that criticizes Winterbottom's unfaithful adaptation. What I think is that as long as we lack the discourse on filmability, writability, or adaptability, all the discussion we make will be a Cock and Bull story, and the best of its kind I ever heard.